Hey dreamers, this is Saki and welcome to a new video. I quickly wanted to thank you all so much for the absolutely astonishing feedback for my Golden Forest. I really appreciate all of the amazing comments and everyone who shared it so the whole world can learn how powerful dreams can be. Now, this is the video that you all have been waiting for. I'll be sharing a full breakdown guide on how I created my Golden Forest, or how you can create pretty much any large high realism environments in general. Before we get started though, make sure to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to not miss out on future videos like creative art, helpful tutorials or amazing community creations. So let's dive in. The first step before we start creating can be to gather inspiration and think about what we can take from it to make our own thing. I was absolutely amazed and impressed with the setting and environments of Sucker Punch's new masterpiece Ghost of Tsushima, and I wanted to make something inspired from it in dreams. So I recorded this clip and paid closer attention to what kind of assets I want to create for the environment. We need one detailed ground asset in multiple variations, a tree asset, a rock asset, a torii, and additional grass and foliage. So with that in mind, let's go on to creating. A common thing when making games, especially scenes or levels, is to greybox a layout at first. With simple shapes, no real textures or colors, we lay out the environment to get a feeling for the scale and how everything behaves and feels like without putting too much effort into it yet. Here you can see how I sketched out the environment and also put a puppet into it, which is important to keep track of the scale. The first thing I started with is to make 5 different variations of the ground asset that we need for the scene. For that, I used my asset which I made for the realistic ground tutorial, where I explained you guys in detail how you can create them for yourselves. I'll link it in the info box on the top. As you can see, I made one asset having a little puddle or water in it. For that, I just used one single flag with 0 impasto, and that actually works pretty well. Then we also have 2 assets covered with leaves. Those leaves are painted with surface snap and the splash flag. I made one having a lot of leaves on them and having one a little bit less, and we also got 2 normal ones with a slightly different color each. We can then go on and get a sun gadget out to have a quick look on how our texture looks like in the scene, and also make little adjustments like I did with the water and the normal ground asset. Here's a quick showcase of how it looks like after we covered our sketch with the ground assets. I spent a lot of time in detail into lining them up properly, making the pathway with normal ones and having a little bit of leaves right next to it, and on the outside we have the ones with a lot of leaves onto them. Then we can also go ahead and have a quick playtest on how this feels like when being in our character, and I'm also quickly putting a sun gadget in there to have a quick atmosphere test. Next we go on and make the grassy landscape that you can see between the forest, also featuring that awesome white grass flower-like foliage. For that I use a transform sphere and soft blend stamp the basic landscape together. Then we can also go on and subtract soft blend it to smooth it out a little bit. After we got the shape how we want it, we can go on and make some tweaks and make it look like actual grass. For that I first adjust the color and the finish. For realistic grass specifically, I recommend a very high roughness. Now we just need to add a little bit of looseness, the streaky flag type and full impasto onto it. I also like to increase the color amount in the second tab of the tweak menu. After that we paint the foliage that is featured within the grass. For that I took out a cube and activated surface snap to draw onto it. With the draw flex option you can draw thicker or thinner lines, which helps a lot. After we are finished, we can also go on and adjust the single strokes a little bit to make it look more like 3D. After that I just made it physical so it's actually moving like wind is blowing through it, and also cloned it within the tweak menu of the painting. Now onto covering our landscape with rocks. Rocks are great, I love them, and for this scene I used my rock that I created with the 1% sculpting video. I will also leave you guys that in the info box on the top. Before we start placing them, I made some more tweaks since we don't really need them on the 1% graphics thermo, so I used the sculpture detail tool to make them less loose and also tweak the color each a little bit to create variation. Here it's really up to you on how you want to place them in your scene. The great thing about rocks is that you only really need one and you can still make it look all different. While doing this, which was a lot of fun, I also figured out that it looks absolutely great when I combine them with my ground assets again. Just watch the following footage and get an idea of how you can build a world with it. Here's the second quick showcase of how it looks like after we covered our landscape with rocks, foliage and also the first little details. We did that with combining our assets, putting small little rocks into the ground, the puddles or in between the ground assets. I also used the grassy landscape that we created to add some additional grass to the other side, as well as some painted additional grass at some parts of the ground. Now onto what you guys are probably interested in the most. How did I do the realistic tree that I created for this scene? And to be honest, I had a lot of respect for creating realistic trees. I wasn't exactly sure how to pull it off, but in the end my ideas worked out absolutely perfect and I'm very happy with the outcome and techniques that I created for it. In the first step, we just want to point out the basic shape of the tree, and here I can only recommend you to work with the curvy tool since it's just perfect for that kind of stuff. You can make as many branches as you like, but more to that later. In the second step, we now want to go on and define the shape of what the tree should look like, adding some more detail by using a very long transform sphere to smear onto all of it with surface snap activated. For the thinner parts, especially the branches, we need to size the shape smaller and just try out with what looks best to you. After we're happy with that, in the third step now happens the magic. I was actually so surprised and happy with how well it worked. We can achieve an amazing looking bark texture when we just go on to the subtract mode, add the whole option to our transform sphere and pretty much do the same again. We just subtract smear with surface snap activated and let the magic happen. I will also bring you guys a more in-depth and detailed tutorial just like my others for making realistic trees. If I can make it, it'll probably come next week already. Now, the probably biggest question of them all, how in the world can we create realistic looking leaves? And to be honest, I was a little bit lost on this. I knew that for realistic leaves it had to be 3D, and I quickly figured out I can't just make one detailed leaf and clone that a million times because that's a big rip for the gameplay thermal. So yeah, I quickly realized I freaking need to make the whole branch with all of its leaves as one single sculpt, doing every leaf individually, and here I can straight away tell you, plan in some time. This asset took me about 2 hours, but in the end it was absolutely worth it. First, we want to create the branch itself. For that I used pretty much the same techniques that we also used to create the tree before, just with like thinner shapes and more little branches. But then, what's the best and fastest way to create so many leaves individually? And here I gotta thank my friend and inspiration from the community, Martin Nabelong, who gave me the idea to use the curvy tool for that as well, so here's a quick look on how I did it. So here's a look on the finished tree and how I implemented our new detailed branch asset into it. That was probably one of the most satisfying things in this project. The moment I realized how absolutely perfect and satisfying it looks like when I put the branch asset into the end of the branches of our tree, it was like puzzle pieces clicking in, and it made me smile. Especially because I thought like, thank God those 2 hours were just a waste of time, because while creating all of the leaves, I still wasn't really sure if it's gonna look good in the end or not, and I think the final look of the tree is pretty good and I'm happy with it. Now, the last part that is missing is the Torii gate, and I already had one, but I went into it to make it fit to the realistic style of the rest of the environment, mainly using the same techniques to create a wood texture as we did for the tree. In the end, I don't know why, but this story looks so satisfying and good to me. I'm very happy with the outcome. Also, I spray painted the logo of Ghost of Tsushima, which raised the quality and look even more for me. Now, on to the last part. After we spent hours and days creating all of our assets, we can now finally go on and create the world of our dreams. It is really a lot of fun, and it is satisfying to finally be able to piece these assets together, and I'll quickly move you around and give you a look on how I did it, how I built this world. And one of the best things that also just happened was like I realized how freaking good it looks like when I take the leaves that we created for this tree as bushes and also place them in the landscape. I think that looks better than the actual leaves for the trees, just because when you scale it smaller, it features so much more detail, and it's actually because we made it all in one sculpt. It's super thermo friendly even, and yeah, I covered the ground of the whole forest with it, and I also placed some in the mountains or between the rocks, and I think they look really good, especially when they're like hitting the sunlight. I also created a little different version of the tree, just cutting it out a little bit and create this like bark there, which also looks good if it's just like laying down there in the landscape. And I also used the additional grass that we did earlier to cover this around the trees, which also looks quite good. Then I'll also give you a quick look on how this white foliage looks like. In the end, I think it became a lot better than I expected at first, because this was actually also giving me more struggles than I imagined in the beginning. And yeah, in the end, with everything, with the whole atmosphere, looks just so good. And especially look at that, how good are these trees looking from above? Like, it looks like a real forest from above, and I'm really happy with the outcome of this. You can also see the whole world, and that I actually used that first environment that we made, all the pieces together, to group it and expand the forest quite fast and easily. I did that 3 or 4 times, and I also went on to like make little changes and change it up a little bit. That's how you can like create a variety in the environment, and to also like round up the level so you can't really see that the level's actually ending, which you should definitely do. And I mostly just like scaled up the rocks in like the background, and yeah. Now I'll also give you guys a quick look on the thermometer, since a lot of you are probably interested in how thermo heavy this whole realistic environment is, and to your surprise maybe, it's actually not that bad. We only have 68% gameplay and 39% graphics thermo, and it's not even super well optimized to create an open world, so we could add so much more into this still. And if you didn't believe that, an open world realistic environment in Dreams is possible, there you have the answer. Here's a quick look on how I made the leaves as well. But if you want to know how to do that or weather effect in general, I recommend you to watch my tutorial on it. And yeah, here's a quick look on what I used to create more atmosphere or more little details. I used some lights to light up specific places or give the rocks a little bit of a more realistic texture as well, or a better look. I really like to do that. And yeah, I also used fog in the distance to give it this like look of the fog of war. That means where the level ends and you can't really see behind it. But it also is of course great for an atmosphere in a forest in general. So yeah, I can really recommend you to work with fog in general. I'll also probably try out a little bit more with it. And yeah, now to the other interesting things, the sky gadget and the gradient effects gadget. Here you can see how crazy it looks like with the atmosphere or without it. I think it's such a huge difference, and what I did for the sky is make a few little tweaks that you can see here. It's pretty much up to you what you use there. I just went to obviously recreate the atmosphere of the Golden Forest of Ghost of Tsushima, and especially the gradient effects gadget does a lot to it. Here's important to basically play around with the color variation, the color grading and color correction. I mainly set a focus on these golden leaves and the golden look. Yeah, I also gave it a lot of bloom and light rays because that also always makes it look a lot more realistic, and I also sharpened it up a little bit more. Now here's also an interesting look on how the environment looks like without paintings and without the code style. That's always, I think, pretty interesting to see as well. And yeah, this is the realistic environment. This is the golden forest that I created, inspired by Ghost of Tsushima, and my most realistic environment so far. And that's it. I'm freaking dead. I worked insanely hard on this project all week long, especially on this breakdown for you guys, but I really do believe that it can help many dreamers and actually make a change to the Dreamiverse. So please go and support this video, sharing it with any person you can, and if you want to support me as an artist, you can now also become a channel member. That's a function that we unlocked with the 10,000 subscribers, or you can also donate or subscribe to my Patreon page where you will get exclusive content as well. The link can be found in the description down below. And with that, I would like to thank you guys very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a like, some feedback, and also don't forget to subscribe to the channel and ring that bell to not miss out on future videos. I will see you in the next one.